Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today guests we have our distinguished analyst, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. It's good to be here.
And we have a producer of Pod TV, Mark Lee. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Glad to be here with you, Sasha. You're always doing amazing things and giving amazing insights into what is going on with the Ukrainian war and all in that space. So always glad to pop in when I can and share insights, but also hear the amazing insights that you and Jonathan bring.
Thank you, Mark. And now, without further delay, the podium is yours, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood.
Yes, Sasha, I wanted to focus on a report less than a day ago of an interview with on obviously the Russian media.
Yes. Temporary delay. We'll wait a little bit because it's very, very important, the information what Jonathan is going to release. In the meantime,
we're still connected. Good.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. This Russian military commander was being interviewed in Russian media, and he was of the opinion that the Ukrainians were not going to be defeated, that this war would have to end in an armed truce. Now that's very similar to the remarks that I was making on another program, the World Economics Program, and where our host also was of the opinion that this war would not end in a treaty. They would end in an armed truce, an armistice, similar to that which exists between the two Koreas. So now you have a situation that's very interesting. It's reasonable to suspect that Russian military commander's opinion is more widespread within Russia, the Russian military, and possibly the political leadership, so that they are steadily becoming to recognize that defeating Ukraine outright in line with the political goals of Mr. Putin is not possible. So they may have to put off their objectives indefinitely, at least settle for an armed truce. Now with that in mind, if the Russian military is steadily coming to recognize that Ukraine cannot be defeated outright, that the key now becomes that battle for cutting off Crimea from the rest of Russia, for that drive that the Ukrainians are slowly but steadily making towards the Sea of Azov. Once they reach the coast, once they have severed or are able to effectively interdict the railway bridge and the highway between Crimea and Russia, then Crimea will be effectively cut off.
It will be an island.
Excuse me?
It will be an island.
It will be an island. And then once it falls into Ukrainian hands, it will be much easier to subdue it because the Russians won't be able to resupply. And that will be unmistakable. The Russians won't be able to hide that. They won't be able to explain it away. And the Ukrainians will have a major operational battlefield victory to display to their Western allies and to shore up both short-term and long-term political support. And if they can achieve that operational victory on the battlefield, just that one, then that will lead to others. It will put greater pressure on the Russians to withdraw or to make a settlement. And it will render next year's presidential election irrelevant, largely irrelevant. Again, that's what the Ukrainians are pushing for. They are very, very patient, but very persistent in pressing for that and marshaling their resources, keeping them in reserve until the most critical moment to create that operational breakthrough, which will sever Crimea from Russia and bring an operational victory and subsequently a political victory to the Ukraine. And that is probably the key thing that we should be looking for. The Western military analysts, they are trying to, shall we say, I tend to be rather suspect of these other Western military analysts, in that they are trying to jump on the bandwagon, and they want to look good. They want to look the most prescient. They are afraid to take a contrarian view, in other words, to go against the crowd. And here is where I believe that we, looking at the situation in the manner that we do, that we are taking a contrarian view, and that we're saying that, contrary to the consensus belief, the apparent emerging consensus belief, Ukraine is not being close to being defeated. They have a chance to achieve a significant operational victory, which will lead to political victory for Ukraine and independence. It may come at the, we may have to give up a little something, in that we will not be able to have a formal peace treaty recognizing it, because the Russians will never agree to such a treaty. They may well be more open to agreeing to an armistice, a ceasefire, in which case they will go back into their corners and plan for the next war, which will simply, what that will mean for the West is that Ukraine certainly must be admitted into the European Union, because that did not depend upon there being in a state of war. And they may be able to make some provisions between individual NATO nations and Ukraine to continue to build up and prepare and repair the damage that has been done. That can be done technically without admission into NATO. If you have a series of bilateral agreements, bilateral economic and military agreements that do not involve a decision of NATO as a whole, then you can get around that clause that says that, well, you technically can't be admitted because you're still will be technically in a state of war with Russia.
Jonathan, and some of these agreements are being prepared as we speak.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask, Jonathan. I'd love to hear your thoughts around this, because I mentioned it on the World Edition earlier, but I did see that the U.S. has approved sending F-16s to Ukraine from Denmark and the Netherlands. So it's kind of like an end-around way of getting them to
there we go.
Ukraine and all along those lines. So it seems to me that is playing into what you are talking about, even with some of the acceptance of Ukraine into the EU and some of the other European-based organizations. So is that going to be one of the things happening as a result of that?
That will be very helpful. And also, this does not preclude the United States. I had mentioned on an earlier program that one of the key measures of post-conflict restoration of Ukraine to a stronger status would be to get engineer brigades or engineer units into Ukraine to help not just for them to do the rebuilding themselves, but they would do some of that, yes, but to also teach the Ukrainians and provide them with equipment and procedures. And as we've seen, because the Ukrainians are so industrious and quick learners, faster than expected, that they would be able to take that equipment and do things that would exceed our expectations, and they will be able to recover more quickly than we expected. So these are all good indications. These are good indicators that a reasonable peace. You can't expect perfection here because we live in a fallen world. This is a morally fallen world. And this world is not like Burger King. You can't always get it your way.
Jonathan, in fact, a lot of observers of the war, they admit the ingenious talents of Ukrainian people, even in areas as high tech. And they knew with this drones, sea drones that are incredibly effective. And Ukrainians now have their own factory to produce these drones, and they are hidden somewhere way behind the
right. So similar to the underground factories that Nazi Germany had created itself during World War II, and Albert Speer had supervised the construction of those underground factories in order to enable the Germans to increase their war production, even while they were being bombed, relentlessly by the Allied bomber forces.
And they were still able to do it.
Yes, go ahead.
Jonathan, and Sasha, just really quickly, because one of the other things I've heard about from Ukraine and everything is this notion of Black Sea shipping, and apparently Ukraine has put it out in notice that they are going to be determined to restore Black Sea shipping despite the Russian threats to continue to attack the Black Sea. How important is the Black Sea in the war, and how important is it to make sure that those ports are open? That's one of the things that I know a lot of people are probably looking at the war and trying to figure out how vital that is to
Well,
the war
taking a
effort.
look at you, just take a look at a map, for God's sake. I mean, the only way that Ukraine is going to get its exports out by sea is really through the Black Sea, and in any major
There
way.
is no other sea for Ukrainians.
Otherwise, they're landlocked. And so, the importance of the Black Sea is obvious for Ukrainians, and it should be. They may have to. Now, the danger of this is that NATO, if it becomes a wider war, God forbid, that NATO would have to become involved in suppressing the Russian Black Sea Fleet, neutralizing it, taking it completely out of action, so that the Black Sea becomes a Ukrainian and NATO lake. And it becomes unopposed.
Jonathan, with Ukrainian sea drones, I think NATO would have to engage Ukrainian technology to get rid of the Russian ships.
Hey, more power to them if they're able to do it.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely. And I think, Jonathan, answering Mark's question, in order to have available Black Sea to Ukraine, they have to destroy Russian Black Sea fleet. And the way to do it is exactly the sea drones. Actually, sea drones, so very few people are aware, they're using Skydo Canadian technology developed many years ago. That's exactly what they're doing now. So they can carry quite a lot of load of explosives, and so far they're highly effective. And I saw one program on sea drones, Ukrainian sea drones, that Russians they don't understand even what to do about them, whether it has to be their missiles or their ships, but their ships are being attacked. So how they can prevent this? So they are completely at loss what to do about them. That's quite
which is good. Which is good because that keeps the initiative in the hands of the Ukrainians. It helps them keep the Russians off balance, and all of these things work together, both subtle, in ways subtle and dramatic, so that the key prize here in the near to intermediate future, the key prize is the Crimea, severing the link, making it a vulnerable and isolated element that will drop into Ukrainian possession just as easily as catching an apple falling from a tree.
And this Crimea is a prize to Putin's almost personal possession. He was so adamant that Crimea must be a part of Russia, and it's much more important to him, Crimea, than all other territories like Zaporozhye and Kherson and Donetsk and Lugansk and all that stuff. The Crimea is number one. And by Ukrainians successfully attacking it and eventually taking it over, that will be absolutely incredible development. Now, I would like to bring, Jonathan, another theme that is there some contradiction, and maybe you will be able to explain. Remember, the start of Russian invasion was February 22. But when it all started in June 22, when Putin published a very long article about the history of Ukraine, that it's not a real state, that it was mistakenly created by Lenin, and then Khrushchev gave it Crimea and so on, but actually it's not a nation, it's not a country, it's nothing but part of Russia and so on. Well, that article was quite alarming in a way, because as a leader of the country, it's not somebody else, historian or philosopher or somebody else, it was published by leader of the nation, a very large country. And a few months later, the war indeed started. Now, just a couple of days ago, he published another article about Poland and Lithuania. And where he states that Poland is not really a state, that Poland was created, it was part of Russia for centuries and so on, and it's the same as Lithuania.
Same old song, second verse.
So, what are we? Should the West and all of us be alarmed by repetitive nature of Putin's articles?
Well, they should be alarmed in the sense that it shows that Putin does not accept the independent nationality of NATO, of both a NATO member, Poland, and a matter of fact, a member that was previously a Warsaw Pact member, and now they became Poland became one of the most fervent converts to becoming a member of NATO and to attaining NATO standards. And Poland had also been, if you'll recall, been demanding and wanting very much to have not only ballistic missile defenses stationed on their territory, they also wanted to have if they got everything on their wish list, they would have American troops, ballistic missile defenses, and nuclear weapons stationed on their territory. They wanted it all.
Welcome to hell.
Yeah, they basically, if the Russians attacked Poland and if they had everything they wanted, they would be involved. Well, for one thing, they would be involved with a war with the United States, not just NATO, because having American troops there, in theory, the ideal deterrent for preventing war between NATO or deterring it to the maximum extent possible, it would be to have American troops of certain types stationed in all of the border countries bordering NATO and Russian territory. So you would have, and ideally on the eastern flank, for Finland and Ukraine, if you got Ukraine into NATO and you are forming an eastern bulwark with the Baltic states and Ukraine, and you would be able to have those kinds of troops would be ballistic missile defense troops to form a ballistic missile defense shield. And in the interior, for Ukraine, you would have engineering troops to help supervise repair, reconstruction, defenses, etc., and economic recovery. But you would ideally want to have an American presence, even if it only looked symbolic, but you want to have a military presence of some sort in every NATO country that is theoretically could be attacked by Russia, so that in the event of any armed aggression by Russia against the NATO nations, especially on the eastern flank, the American troops would form the necessary trigger, a tripwire that would cause immediate involvement of the United States.
Jonathan, but I still can't figure out how the Russian army, which spent 9 months taking over Bakhmut, how they can seriously think about attacking NATO countries like Poland or Lithuania or anybody else.
Well, it's not realistic. It is not realistic. It is as much punishment as they took and as much weakness as they showed in offensive operations against against Ukraine, then it would be even more unrealistic, assuming that there is no collapse of political will on the part of the West, which is the probability of that is very low because, as we've seen, Russian aggression against Ukraine has effectively galvanized NATO and caused them to acquire 2 more members.
Hey, Jonathan, speaking of that, and speaking of non-realistic goals and non-realistic things all along those lines, there is a conference that is going on of some nations that are aligned, and sometimes their alignment doesn't make that much sense and everything, but it is the BRICS Alliance, and apparently the BRICS Alliance has Ukraine on their agenda because apparently of the BRICS nations, only Brazil voted in favor of a February United Nations resolution calling for an end to the conflict and demanding the Russian withdrawal. China, India, and South Africa all abstained, and Lula, who I believe is the leader of Brazil, said he wants the bloc to help forge peace. So apparently South Africa is driving an African initiative to bring an end to the combat as well. So what is our thoughts about BRICS trying to put themselves in the middle of the war situation and I guess play peace broker, because that is what they sound like they are doing in this particular thing, even though Mr. Putin himself cannot appear at the South African event, because if he does, he'll be arrested. So that is one of the things that is going on. So
Mark, you already answered your own question. Where is Mr. Putin?
Yeah. It's meaningless. It's meaningless without Mr. Putin's active participation. Otherwise, BRICS is irrelevant. And the way that NATO and the United States acting in concert say, let's assume following a truce, an armistice between Russia and Ukraine, which seems to be the most realistic outcome attainable at this point. The most realistic thing, effective thing to deter a future conflict would be for the U.S. and NATO to build that global ballistic missile defense system, where we have the components for it. We have, in theory, we have a doctrine and a strategy to do it. And apparently, the one great secret in this whole thing is that neutralization of global nuclear arsenals is now possible. It is within reach, given the proper military and political decisions to do so. So that is the one, and it is the one great thing. It is the one great secret that the Russians dare not speak, because, as you know, as I've pointed out before, the one thing that the Russians fear more than anything else is the potential of American technology to neutralize the one thing that Russia perceives as its claim to being a great power, its nuclear missile arsenal. Once that is neutralized, Russia is irrelevant. It is a third world country which happens to have nuclear weapons.
No, I would add something. It's a third world country with the snow.
With what?
With the snow.
Oh, with snow. Third world country with snow. Yeah.
A large one. Snow. A lot of snow.
Lots of snow over there in the Siberian area and all along those lines. But to
lots
your point,
lots of area that nobody really wants to occupy.
They're not trying to go there.
No.
Not even the Chinese.
But to your point, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, is going to represent Vladimir Putin, who apparently is going to attend this BRICS conference virtually so he can avoid possible arrest for alleged war crimes if he entered the country.
Right.
So Putin is on the run, and that's a hilarious situation. So, Jonathan, this now F-16s sooner or later are coming. Atacams will come for sure. So with German Taurus, Ukraine will have pretty good chances on the battlefield. Never mind.
It will improve their operational effectiveness. Certainly, they will think, given the skill that they have shown thus far, they will be able to figure out the best way to integrate F-16s into their operational plans. They are not going to. I don't think they believe that they are going to roll the dice and, shall we say, and gamble their F-16 capability by deliberately exposing it. They will integrate F-16s at the decisive moment and in a way which will maximize their effectiveness, but also maximize their safety as well.
Yeah, for sure. Now, very interesting what we discussed earlier about Poland and Lithuania. I think Putin is obsessed indeed with countries which were either part of Russia, and even though they're now NATO countries and European Union countries, you see, he doesn't have any problems with France to be in NATO and European Union or so on. But somehow he's taking so aggressively that the former either Soviet Union and Warsaw Pact countries trying to, or they are independent and so on, and he's getting crazy over it. But I think he should be even crazier over former East Germany, the Dresden, where it was KGB office headed by Putin many years ago in the 80s. How he so easily gave away the East German pride to be independent, a part of Warsaw Pact and so on, and all of a sudden now it's a small part of Germany. How does he take it? Why he's not making any claims on former East Germany?
I think he has implicitly recognized that East Germany which was an artificial. Keep in mind that was an artificial creation, a
Yeah.
purely artificial creation. It was not based on nationalism. It was not based on historicity or anything like that. There was not. I mean, unless you wanted to say that East Germany, since it comprised most of the former state of Prussia, going back to
Including Kaliningrad or
right,
Kaliningrad.
that would be a stretch in any case. So I think that his problem is more with the Poles, who have a much stronger tradition of independence than would say East Germany, which was considered as an artificial creation, and they have effectively. They probably recognize that East Germany and its people have effectively been absorbed and reintegrated into a larger Germany.
I was always impressed by the fact that in 1989, the when the Great Wall in Berlin fell, uh, East Germany, which was pronouncing how patriotic they are and how they're proud of their socialist country, which is far better way than Western Germany or so. No one came out to defend this Berlin Wall. It fell apart in a matter of few minutes. So where were these great socialist ideas, and where this great Stasi and similar to KGB in Russia? Where all of these people were?
They were an artificial imposition. It was an artificial imposition which had no real basis in popular support or in historical experience. So once the oppressive or repressive power of the Soviet Union failed, and the Soviet Union was busy disintegrating. That meant that nations that were only loosely held formerly, they just fell away, almost again like apples falling off a tree. No way was Germany, East Germany, going to try to stick it out and defy the forces that were engulfing it.
Hey, Jonathan and Sasha, y'all will get a kick out of this because, I'm definitely a fan of culture and cultural activities and all along those lines. And yesterday, or I think it was 2 days ago, I was watching an episode of Scorpion, which is a TV series. It's a police-oriented TV series, a bunch of geniuses that are going after nations and everything. And the episode that I was watching actually featured the leaders of three Eastern European countries that were supposedly trying to have a treaty together and get together and stave off World War III and all along those lines. And this was only 8 years ago that this show was actually put out, 2015. And guess who the leaders were? They were Belarus, Latvia, and Lithuania. So as I was watching this, I'm thinking to myself, like, I need to be watching this with Sasha because he can actually give me some historical context as they are talking about what is going on, because within the nature of this storyline was this fact.
Well,
that
of those nations you mentioned, Belarus has probably the weakest national identity of the three. The other nations, Latvia and Lithuania, they actually have stronger national ethnic identities,
Especially Lithuania.
especially Lithuania, yes. But Belarus, it barely had established a national identity of its own. It became independent in 1991, not through its own efforts, but virtually by default. There was no one to hold them in. There was no one to control them. So they found themselves independent. They said, "What do we do now?"
But all this independence, I would like to remind everybody, started with the first Ukrainian president, Kravchuk, who acknowledged that he just was elected president. And there was a referendum in Ukraine in 1991 that 95 or more even percent wanted to get out of Soviet Union and have nothing to do with Soviet Union. So when Yeltsin approached Kravchuk on behalf of Gorbachev and asked him, whatever conditions you desire, Gorbachev is willing to comply with as long as we will stay in the Soviet Union. And Kravchuk said, if I could do that, number one, I have to resign as a president. Because when I was elected president, 95% of people want to get out of Soviet Union. Who am I to change all that and say, okay, we're going to stay? I can't do that. I have to resign. So we are out. But you both, he said to Belarusian, Shushkevich at the time was president of Belarus, and you two stay, and you will be puppets of Mr. Gorbachev for the next 45 years. And that ignited all this agreement to sort of terminate existence of Soviet Union, and so everybody would go their merry way. So it was Ukraine who actually got that doing.
Hey, Sasha and Jonathan, really quickly, because you kind of alluded to it at the beginning and everything, can this war that is going on have any influence one way or the other on U.S. politics and what is going on with Trump and Biden? So do we see the result of the war swaying the election one way or the other? Because I know the show is called Russia, Ukraine, and China, but the U.S. is also part of the discussion as well. So I was wondering if this is going to sway our elections one way or the other if the war comes to a kind of conclusion that is seen as favorable. Because I know that wars and war situations have sometimes been influences of elections. I even think about the whole Iran situation when I believe it was one of the Bushes got elected and all along those lines. But what is our thoughts about the impact of the war on our upcoming presidential elections?
The impact of the war on the upcoming presidential election, it really depends upon, and keep in mind the Ukrainians, it's not what the Ukrainians realize that in a very large sense, they are in a race against time. Mm-hmm. They know that if they are going to achieve a truce, which seems to be the most realistic thing to achieve at this point, if they're going to achieve a truce, they must achieve a significant battlefield victory, which convinces the Russians and most observers that the Russian victory cannot be attained, that giving Russia any concessions is really out of the question. And so if they can achieve that operational victory, and the key is cutting off Crimea. If the current Ukrainian operations succeed in cutting off supply lines between Crimea and Russia, then that, in my opinion, will lead to great pressure for having an armistice. If an armistice is achieved by, let's say, either end of this year or January or February of next year, the impact will be negligible because it will not be an issue to be debated in upcoming elections. And Ukraine will have a truce. It will have de facto independence. It will have the Crimea back at the very least, and quite possibly the withdrawal of Russian troops as well in order to achieve that. And the Russians will go back to their start lines and sulk and make hidden plans for the next war, however long that takes, or they'll engage in subversion or in hybrid operations, but there won't be any overt military conflict. And its impact on the American elections will be negligible. It will not be an issue on the table. Mr. Trump, even though he says he could end the Russian-Ukrainian war in a day.
Yeah, by giving half of Ukrainian territory.
Yeah, that will be a non-starter. The Ukrainians will have rendered that promise absolutely irrelevant. And Mr. Trump, being a practical man, will say, okay, that's not the thing to concentrate on. That he will have many other issues to campaign on in his bid for regaining the presidency than handing Ukraine over to Russia, which would be out of the question. It's not going to happen. The Russians, an increasing number of Russian military commanders are recognizing that it's not going to happen. So that, again, the key will be decided on the battlefield. The Ukrainians themselves hold their own fate in their hands. They are the masters of their fate in this regard.
Absolutely.
They must achieve the victory, and the rest will fall into place.
Absolutely agree, Jonathan. Thank you so much for today's program. We've covered a lot of issues and even more waiting for us on Tuesday with the great news as well. Okay, have a great weekend, and we'll see you same place, same time. Bye, everybody. Slava Ukraini. Героям слава.